Hi there, my name is Olu Jongerius and I'm your host of our new episode of Beverage and Beyond in Season 2. This episode is dedicated to something that is very close to my heart and mouth, wine. Joining us today is someone I've followed and admired from afar for quite some time, Aidy Smith. So you can only imagine how excited I got when Aidy very quickly agreed to participate in this episode despite his very, very busy schedule and high profile. So yeah, forgive me for a bit of a girlfan vibe during the episode. Aidy Smith is a wine and spirit presenter with a key focus on the modern drinker. As a wine and spirits columnist for The Independent and official brand ambassador for Vivino, Aidy has spent his career developing a fun and curiosity-piquing mindset to drinks. He's also the founder of Drinklusive, which is the drinks industry's first inclusivity mentorship aimed at increasing the representation of drinks personalities from diverse communities. In this episode, we talked about how wine evolved from being a commodity beverage accessible to all into something elite and exclusive and a bit snobbish. The lack of diversity in the wine industry, how the needs and perceptions of drinking are changing for the modern consumers, cultural differences when it comes to wine understanding and consumption, neurodiversity, gender, sexual orientation, race and class when it comes to the professional wine community, and finally, the future of wine consumption around the world. Let's dive into this very, very interesting conversation. All right, good morning, everyone. And it's our next episode of Beverage and Beyond. And today we are talking about wine industry. And for those who know me a little bit, they know that I am not just a wine lover, but I've been getting into wine myself for a couple of years. I started as a side gig, and then I started doing trainings, facilitation, how to simplify wine education, how to democratize it, so to say, and how to remove all the snobism and elitism from wine. So I've been a WSAT member for some time, working on my level 3. And I've been very, very passionate about hearing a lot of stories from people who are professional in the wine industry. And today with us, we have Aidy Smith, who is extremely interesting person. And this episode is a little bit different because for me, it's very personal, and it's also the fact that it's our first conversation today. So we haven't even had a small talk. So welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today. And how are you doing?
Thank you so much, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing very well. It's been a wonderful week so far. The sun is outside. It's shining, which means it's a great excuse to open even more champagne, white or rosé, or the chilled reds, whatever tickles your fancy. And yeah, just having a great week and even better now.
Fantastic. I don't think I need any excuse to have champagne, but I mean, when you don't have an excuse, you just have a nice cava. But champagne will require a little bit more of an excuse for that. So Aidy, who are you, and what is your experience like in wine industry, and how is it related to the topic we're talking about today, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Love this. So who am I? I mean, to be honest with you, I think I'm still asking myself that question every day. Do we ever truly know who we are? We're always kind of learning. But in an actual practical sense for a job, I do a couple of different things. So first and foremost, I'm a TV presenter, broadcaster, and journalist within the wine and spirits world, but also within the travel world, also within neurodivergence and LGBTQIA+. So I kind of bridge all of those together across my TV, radio work, podcast work, and newspaper, online writing, all of that kind of jazz. And then on the other side of things, I work very much within the neurodivergent world. So I'm the only TV presenter in the UK with Tourette syndrome, one of around 5 in the USA. And I work very closely with a lot of different charities. So I'm a patron for Europe's largest neurodivergent charity, the ADHD Foundation, the neurodiversity charity. And I'm also the global ambassador for the world's largest Tourette syndrome charity, which is the Tourette Association of America. And so I essentially go around the world debunking the stigmas of what Tourette syndrome is, talking about ADHD, talking about dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and any form of neurodivergence, to help create a world where people are a lot more understanding of what others are going through. And beyond the understanding part, actually going about and seeing how they can help these people thrive and get the best out of them. Because neurodivergence is so often looked at as some kind of burden on society, when in actuality, if you could harness what people have in their differences in thinking, it can actually become this, secret superpower in disguise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I bring all of those worlds together. And it just so happens that a lot of the people who I talk to on the LGBTQI plus or travel side or neurodivergent and disability side have a bit of a passion for wine. And so when those two worlds come together, they join in, matrimony. People are exploring and uncovering wines they never knew existed, which is one of my biggest passions.
I love how multifaceted, and at the same time it all comes together with your experience in this beautiful, so to say, package of very eclectic experiences at the same time that all makes sense. Yeah.
I love it. I think that's the beauty of life, though. I think that if I was just a drinks person, I'd get a little bit bored. And if I was just a drinks person, I'd just be talking to drinks people. The fact that I get to talk to people from all different walks of life and hear about their passions and interests and bring them into the other worlds I'm a part of and vice versa is just a really, really nice thing.
Yeah. And I love the way you destigmatize all those things about neurodiversity as a whole. I think one of the best days of my life was actually last year when I was diagnosed myself with ADHD. And you're kind of still in the process of getting to know yourself. It's kind of like you're understanding, like, that's what I'm doing this. So it's like, you starting having dates with yourself it's like meeting yourself for the first time. And I just wish it would have been earlier in life. And as you said, it's a superpower. And what I am now, what I've achieved now today, it's not despite ADHD. I think it's because of that. So that's how it all created.
I definitely agree to that. I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. And, similarly to yourself, I got my diagnosis for ADHD last year. I'd gone throughout the vast majority of my life thinking that my ADHD symptoms were from the Tourette syndrome. And so it was a bit of an epiphany moment for me. I was doing a documentary for Virgin Radio at the time, all about ADHD. And as I started to interview people, I couldn't help but think, oh my God, we're talking about me here. This sounds so similar. And so I kind of changed the format of the documentary slightly to embark on a diagnosis journey myself whilst bringing everyone else in to tell their own stories, but to see if I well and truly and genuinely did have ADHD. And it turns out I did in the 99th percentile. So I definitely have it. But, it's once you have that diagnosis bone, there's kind of a sigh of relief, a momentary sigh of relief of, oh my goodness, it wasn't just all in my head. There's a reason for all of this. But then to your very point, you're then beginning to uncover this journey of, okay, well, that's why I act in this way. But how can I think differently so that I don't overact here or I don't become frustrated here? What are the things that I can do each day to help myself, be better at this or manage that? Or there's so many different things. And it's an ongoing journey, which isn't easy, but it's still very rewarding at the end of it.
Wonderful. Let's dive in then into the wine industry. So throughout the history, it never used to be anything fancy as it is today. A wine industry used to be just a commodity. That's just like breads and milk. It's the blood of Jesus. It more comes from religion. It never used to be as elitist as it is now, and how people feel and think of that. But at the same time, when you think about people who drink wine, people who evaluate wine, people who buy wine or show us wine in the fanciest places, the main word is fancy. Yeah, so it's a specific kind of person that you imagine when you close your eyes. So from your experience, who is a typical person? What are the stereotypes about the wine industries that you would like to also change? Because I've heard of you for the first time is through Jimmy. Wine with Jimmy, and I know he's one of your mentees. And would you like to also talk about the program that you have created at the end of last year? And it'll be fascinating to hear.
Absolutely. And so I think, you asked the question of what are the stigmas surrounding wine? Who are the types of people who are drinking wine? How is it looked at? I mean, in a way, wine and lobsters have a lot more in common than we think. So, if you go back years and years and years ago, like centuries ago, wine, as you say, was just a commodity. It's what every person drank. You don't kind of know what the quality of it was, but people just used to drink it. And it was the same with lobsters back in the day. Like, lobsters were looked at as a poor person dish because they were really hard to open. Crabs were the same. It was really difficult to take the shell off. And we fast forward, centuries to where we are now. And both of these dishes or cuisines or gourmet elements are looked at as fancy, elitist, luxury. I think there's two sides to that coin. I don't think that wine is this luxury thing that it's being made out to be, because I think that if you have, £5 or you have £20,000, you can be drinking wine. And people look at it very subjectively. It depends what you want out of that bottle, and it depends on your reasons for drinking. People who typically would spend less on wine, even if they had the income to be able to spend more, do it because they want to get drunk. They don't really care what's in their glass. They just want to drink it to feel that inebriation. And I think people who don't necessarily have loads and loads and loads of money, but are buying wines that are a little bit more expensive, do so because of the rarity or the country it comes from or the grape variety or the vintage, because they're wanting to really delve into that passion that they have for the grape. And so, it's a really interesting one for me, because is the wine industry looked at as being this very luxury and elitist place? Yes. Is it that? When you look at the entirety of it, no. When you look at certain subsections of it, those people absolutely exist. And I think that they're probably a minority, but looked at as the majority. Now, one thing that I will say about the wine industry in general and people who drink wine is that they are not very diverse in terms of their makeup. It's typically more than likely middle-aged white people who will be drinking wine. I think there's just as much men and women drinking wine. Those who are actually in the industry is another question, but beginning to balance out. I think that people from underrepresented ethnicities are arguably the individuals who are not drinking as much wine, but that's because they've never had someone who looks like them, has the same culture and beliefs as them, driving them on that journey and being that catalyst of discovery. If you look at the wine communicator world, or people in brand ambassador positions, or people who are on TV or radio, they all kind of look exactly the same. They're white, middle-aged, straight, abled, typically. And I'd say that now in the communicator world, there's a good balance of men and women. I'd argue that it's probably more quote unquote influencers who are female now than there are men. I think there's a bit of an outbalance there. So I think that there's definitely been progression on that front. But what we really need to work on is underrepresented communities as well. And by that, I mean people from an LGBTQIA plus background who have a, typical history of abusing alcohol and just drinking it to get drunk. People who are from neurodivergent worlds who are just or disability worlds who are looked at as, they shouldn't drink because they have learning difficulties or they are unable to think about these things properly, which is completely incorrect. Just because I have Tourette syndrome and ADHD and dyslexia doesn't make me any less intelligent than other people. In actuality, because of the cultural awareness, empathy, and emotional intelligence that I've learned from the challenges I've overcome, I'm probably more intelligent in the grand scheme of things than the average person. So there's that community that is massively under kind of valued when it comes to wine. And that leads me on to, which I touched upon, underrepresented ethnicity communities who, again, if you kind of go out there, yes, there's absolutely people from those communities who are interacting with wine and spirits. And it's our duty to look further to be able to find them. The fact that they've not been given a platform to stand on in order to reach others within their communities is where the problem, the issue lies. Because if they're not given a platform and people from their own communities can't see that they are into wine, that they are exploring things and sharing their information and their passion with others just like them, then those individuals won't look at wine as a passion. So they'll find passions in other things, perhaps music, all these other things that are going on. And this leads me nicely into why I decided to create the mentorship program that I have. So it's called Drinklusive. And the whole point is about creating this inclusive world within drinks where people from underrepresented communities are given a burst of freedom and will propel them through various skills, through giving them a platform to essentially come out of the program getting any entry-level job in drinks that they want, but more than that, having built themselves an actual meaningful profile and being known in the industry. So every 6 months, I take on a cohort of 6 people, 2 people from an LGBTQIA plus background, 2 people from an underrepresented ethnicity background, and 2 people from a neurodivergent or disability background. And there is a lot of crossover within that. So you often find certain people have certain things. Beautiful, beautiful. What I give them for each cohort is level 2 and 3 WSET. I pay them to write for the website of my TV show. So their content is getting out there to our audience that we've built over the course of, 6 years from a TV show that's on Amazon Prime, and we've got 3 seasons of it. So lots of people coming to that website. There's a platform there. We put ad spend on social media into every single article that these individuals write to get them out to a new audience. We put every article in the newsletter. I get them a guaranteed commission on jancysrobinson.com. They have a guaranteed commission on theindependent.com or .co.uk. So they've now got an international consumer and international trade outlet under their belt, and they get access to 50 mentors across the industry, but that will soon be 100 mentors. And every month there's a really bespoke session, which could be anything from how to, really deep dive into improving your social media to what are the jobs available in the drinks industry after the completion of this program. And the whole point is to raise the profiles of people from these communities so that once they've finished on the program, others can look at them and think, that person understands me. That person's into wine. They look like me. They have the same condition as me. They love the same people I love. I am going to follow my passion for wine that I never otherwise thought that I would, because now I see there's others like me doing it. That's the whole point of this. And in addition to that, building a sense of learning and understanding through the mentors, because when our mentors talk to our mentees, it's not just the mentees who are learning, it's the mentors. They're indirectly learning about the mentees' lives and then pushing that beautiful knowledge out to the universe through their own communities as well.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's all about having role models, isn't it? If you don't see someone who looks like you, who sounds like you, who has similar challenges succeed, that you think that I might as well not even try, because someone like me will never succeed. And that's the beauty of mentorship and the beauty of elevating the voices that are otherwise not really heard.
To go even a step further, I think that, and I talk about the wine journalism world here specifically, is a very selfish place. And what we're noticing is that as more people come forward within that world who potentially are LGBTQIA plus or neurodivergent or from underrepresented ethnicity groups, they want to help more. And that's not to say that every wine journalist out there is selfish, because they're not. There's some incredible people out there who are helping. Sadly, what we do find is that it is a very selfish industry in general, though. And because there's so few opportunities, the people are very, very guarded.
There's high competition.
And there's certain people who are very well known within the wine industry as journalists and critics who I asked to be mentors on the program, and they just said no. They said they were too busy. They were too busy. And I think that's, where one of the largest issues lies, in that if the people who are getting all the work and getting the pay aren't willing to share that for other people from other communities, with the aim of opening it up enough so that more money comes in for everyone, because that's inevitably what will happen, then nothing will ever change. And, I gave the example of people from underrepresented communities, and I want to talk about how they are the future. If we look at 2061, for example, the representation and kind of split of people from the Asian or Black community in the UK will increase from 18% to 30%. Now, that is a 66% increase from the previous number to the new number. So that community itself will grow 66% from an overall 18% to 30%. Now, that means that the typical demographic and the typical consumer base of wine consumers will shrink. If the Asian and Black community are not being spoken to or communicated to or given people from a communicator standpoint who understand them, who they can follow, they will simply just continue to not purchase or have an interest in. And it's the same thing for the LGBTQIA plus world. The younger generation, so that the children of today do not have labels. They are who they are. If they're gay, they're gay. If they're bi, they're bi. If they're trans or lesbian, that's who they are. And they're people, they embrace it. The generations above us, they were around when being gay was a crime, which was punishable by chemical castration. And so there's this taboo and this stigma. If the younger generation, so the kids of today, when they get to 18, if again, there's no labels.
Not understood, yeah.
Exactly. So they'll want to drink more wine. However, if there is still persecution or they don't see anyone who looks like them, they won't be interested. And that's why we're now finding a lot more of the youth who get to 18 and they're not interested in alcohol.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating. That's what I also heard. There's a lot more kids than, my age, like 16, 17. You drink and this is kind of a normal thing. But different generations, it's a lot more self-conscious, a lot different needs. It's all about spirituality. And then if not even wine industry, like in general, any industry kind of ignores the fact, and it's like, let's use it as a default. We've been doing it for the past 30 years. You're going to continue doing that. You basically miss out on not only the entire generation, but also you miss out different things regarding the cultural differences. Yeah. What is needed there.
Absolutely. And I think that it also boils down to the values as well. Like if we look at the young generation, so for example, we talk about health and everything. Everyone's saying, oh, the younger generation, they're so healthy. No, they're not. They're sticking vape chemicals down their lungs. They're not healthy at all. So I disagree with the notion of some people who say the younger generation are healthy. They're not. It's not about that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be smoking and using vapes and putting toxins in their body.
True.
I think it boils down to values. They look at the people creating the wine, the people drinking wine, the people talking about wine. And if they don't see any values, which they personally hold themselves, then they're turned away from that. When I was a kid, it was like gin and tonic. When I was a kid, when I was 18 to like 25 and I was starting my drinking journey, it was 45 plus individuals who would be drinking gin and tonics. It was an older person drink. So it would never touch my lips ever. And then suddenly, when a whole new generation of people started looking into gin and there were more values and there were companies who were creating it and giving back, there were people from all walks of life who were beginning to explore this, younger people like me. I was like, oh, what's all this about? And then I started to explore it and then it boomed. It absolutely boomed. But it took a new generation and a new kind of thinking to go into gin to allow that to happen. And I think over time, I hope we'll begin to see the same thing with wine. But until the people who have the power come to the realization that they need to hand over some of that power and responsibility and spotlight to people from underrepresented communities, nothing will change.
Not even hand over, like just start listening. Yeah, it's like just start listening to. And that actually leads me to the question that it's, you mentioned values and how younger generation has very different values compared to millennials and compared to older generation. They're more environmentally conscious. So is it also something that wine industry really needs to really pay? And I think it's already started as in biodynamic and then looking into vegan wine and this and this and this. It is something that done simply to follow the audience, just to be able to fit in, or because how it is. Like if I put the label vegan or bio or biodynamic, there will be attract a different audience potentially, or natural wines.
It's an interesting one. I think that natural wines have been embraced by the kind of, millennials of today. And whether or not that's a good thing, I still debate. I think that a lot of natural wines are not made very well in terms of, I don't think there's a lot of love and dedication put into them. I think some of it's lazy winemaking. And I think that I think they're capitalizing on that. But then again, there's some which have been made for generations that are exceptional, some of the best wines on the planet. So it's a bit of both. I think that when it comes to biodynamic and organic and all these things, again, I go back to who's delivering the message. If it's the same old type of person talking about all these things, then the younger generation are going to be like, okay, cool. Like, great, thanks. You know, you're doing what you need to do to help the world, but you should be doing this anyway. So I'm not going to just buy your wine because you're doing what you should be doing.
Yeah.
If it's someone delivering that message in a certain way where those values seem to connect and they can see themselves or be relatable to this person, then they're going to buy into it emotionally. And if you look at any form of product, we continue to buy it because we bought into it emotionally. So we might buy the first bottle and be like, oh, this is quite good. But there's a lot of other options out there. If for some reason we look at that and we feel like we have the same values or emotional connection, or it means something to us more than just the liquid inside, that's when we become a brand advocate. That's when we continue to go. That's when we talk about it, tell other people to try it. That, you know, that's when we take it to other people's houses. And there's a story behind it that's personal to you.
And for the past few years, you could see WSET also showing officially and very publicly its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is your view on that, and whether it's you could see the change happening? I think it was 2022 they started discussing that on a more sea level, and also you could see South Africa. It's also changing a lot of things. You know, I spent I think 3 months in Cape Town, just in Stellenbosch. What surprised me the most is the lack of Black-owned vineyards in wine labels in a country like South Africa. But it's, you know, it comes back to the history, comes back to power play, comes back to elitism. But back to my question, what is your view on WSET and how they're expressing? Do you see any change?
So one of the first supporters of my Drink Inclusive program was the WSET. I was at an event and Michelle Brampton was just about to start as the CEO of the company. And I brought up what I was doing, and she said instantly, she said, we're going to support this. She was like, you've not even told me the full extent of what it is yet, but we're going to support it. And she kept true to her word. Caroline, who looks after their marketing, spoke with her, and you know, a couple of weeks later, it was kind of set. They were going to support the Drink Inclusive program. And I've got a dear friend who is now working in their marketing team called Alex Layton, who historically has put a lot of work and effort into DE&I. He was at Decanter beforehand and helped set up their 360 Decanter initiative with the team there. And I think that, you know, we're coming to a place now again, and I go back to like, what do people stand for? Just because someone isn't from an underrepresented community or they're not diverse, so to speak, doesn't mean that they're a fantastic person who can help very much on this mission, who cares and is very dedicated to it. And the people I just mentioned are those individuals who are kind of invested into creating this change because they genuinely care about people from all walks of life being able to enjoy the same passion that they do. And there should be no restrictions upon that. So I think that the WSET is set up for some great stuff. And I think that they'll continue to, you know, adapt with the world that we're in, to give more aid and assistance to people from underrepresented communities. We call that equity, as you know.
Yeah.
Give more equity to people so that they can have those opportunities just like others. And when it comes to, you know, you said you were in South Africa and you were alarmed at the sheer lack of wineries in the country, in a country that's predominantly, you know, Black individuals, and the lack of wineries owned by Black individuals. I think what's going to happen there is it's going to be the shift of responsibility and the shift of support. You'll have the winemakers and the wineries who are there now. They will bring on apprentices who are from Black communities because of an equity standpoint. Those people probably don't have the education right now because they've not been given the ability or the support to get it. So it's first of all giving people the tools and resources to be able to do these jobs that they are very, very, very capable of doing. The only reason they're not doing them is because they don't have the financial backing and they've not been given a preferential treatment. If you had two people, you know, 15 years ago in South Africa who were going to a school to learn about enology, and one was white and one was Black and everything about them was the same, the white person would have been chosen over the black individual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, it's as simple as that. But now, because the world is changing and everyone has been given a fair chance, and we realize there's a lot of catch up to do, other individuals have been given those chances to balance it out. And that's what we call equity that we keep going back to. So I'm hopeful. I don't know South Africa's kind of, socio-racial, political elements as much as I do other countries like the US and the UK. But I'm hopeful that over time, people from the black communities will be taken under the wings of people who are currently owning these wineries so that they can build up their skill sets. And in a generation's time, so in the next kind of 10, 15 years, that learning will have then transitioned and transferred into these people owning their own wineries and creating their own wine. And from there, new generations will flourish and continue to build.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite wines that I've had in Cape Town was Kalisha, and it's from a township. Just outside of Cape Town. It's fascinating. And then the more you see, the more possibilities open for everyone. What is interesting for me as well is the importance of understanding cultural differences for wine educators, as well as for whoever imports, exports wine, because it does make quite a bit of a difference due to historical reasons, due to values. In some countries, for example, in Eastern Europe, wine is still considered to be purely for female drinkers, and while for men it is hard liquor. So there's still lots of stereotypes. And if I know from the times of USSR, Bulgaria used to be the second largest wine producer in the world because they used to export all wine to USSR, and it was very poor quality. It is now fantastic. I'm actually in Bulgaria right now. Fantastic wine, absolutely undervalued, and I think it's going to only go up in terms of quality. So cultural differences, and also as we see, China and India joining the race and producing some not bad wines. I have to say, it's they're just starting now. And the Chinese market is also being one of the biggest markets for wine collection also. So I find it fascinating to take this into account. And then we see the world regions are changing. Like England is trying to produce wine, because of climate change. We see all these things happening in the very, very same time. From your experience, have you observed in your work in this industry some cultural differences or cultural misunderstanding due to wine?
I mean, definitely. There's so many strands to that as well. You touch upon people in different cultures will create wine in different ways. They will have a certain history that's been embedded within their peoples over generations, and the tips and the tricks, should I say, that they've learned over time. So that's absolutely one thing that allows a particular wine to have a DNA and a personality that's so distinct. And you don't know how the hell it happens, but it does. It's just there. It's, so there's that. I think that culturally, in terms of how people can bring things to the table, I think that people from underrepresented communities tend to bring a bit more empathy to the table. And in a lot of cases, they're more willing to help others because they've been on a journey themselves where either they wish they've received help or they have received help from someone else. And therefore, they're more likely to kind of, give someone a bit of an uphand or give them some guidance and wisdom. And that's certainly something that I see from the younger and more diverse generations in terms of wine communicators, I would say. How the word cultural, when it comes to wine, you can unpack that in so many different ways. Absolutely, it's how people talk about things. It's the tasting notes that people have in various different countries, welcoming people into the fold. I'm very fortunate and lucky that I've tried wines from all across the world, and I've been able to see those taste differences. I was in Tenerife just recently, and they have very few Cabernet Sauvignon on the island. And I tried one, and I've never had so much saline in a wine in my life. It was as if it had about 5 massive tablespoons of salt just placed into it. And for my palate, it took a bit of getting used to. But for the palate of the island, who've been drinking those wines for like generations because of the volcanic soils and the minerality, it's an old thing. So to be able to expand my horizons and my cultural awareness of taste is a beautiful and remarkable thing. I think that people in different countries are hospitable in different ways. I think that, it's one of the most beautiful things is learning about another culture and opening your eyes up to the world and how people interact and the things that they love and the passions that they have, because it allows you to unlock things in your own mind and your own world that you never knew were possible. So,
It's super interesting what you mentioned about tasting notes. I listened to the podcast, one of my favorite wine podcasts, Some, and they discussed something that really interested me regarding tasting notes and how WSET tasting notes are very, obviously it's from Britain. Yeah. So it's very Western. It's a very specific understanding of comparison. You have blueberries, you have roses, you have this and this and this. But while you taste this wine if you sommelier in Asia, there's some things you've never tried. You have a very different kind of exotic fruits that don't really exist in Europe. And this is your association. While someone will say it's a blueberry pie that my granny made that reminds me of this. Some people will never understand what you actually mean. So it's all about the context. Do you have shared context or not? And in this regard, I think WSET is it's very specific. So it's not understanding across cultures. Yeah, so it's a very Western specific tastes and notes, and I don't know, freshly cut grass in some particular countries in the world. It's not as common. Yeah.
I hear you. I think that it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think that they'll be looking to address that in localized areas. I guess the other way of looking at it is if you are someone who is in, for example, India, and you are doing WSET, if all the terms were localized and then you wanted to expand your horizons and travel to Europe to work outside of India, for example, then you'd be a bit lost when you were trying to do your job because you wouldn't know that. Yeah. But on the other hand, if you are in India and you are wanting to stay there and become, a really solid sommelier in great restaurants, and no one knows what on earth you're talking about in terms of blueberries or whatnot, it has the opposite. So I think I would say that in any culture, embrace what the materials are that you're given, but also never be afraid to constantly bring in your own words and adapt and evolve, because that's exactly what organizations like WSET would want. They'd want people to say, okay, you said blueberries, but in this culture, it would be this. It's almost like we are translating. We're translating a translation. We wouldn't go to Spain and force someone to read a book in English. We'd do a translation of it. So what would the equivalent translation be in terms of taste and flavors and having them side by side from a comparison standpoint? But I always find that fascinating when I host tastings and there's someone who's visiting from a country, they're on holiday or they're visiting a friend or whatever it might be. And they say, oh, this to me smells just like, no. And I'm like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, please tell me about it. And they're like, oh, well, it tastes like this. And then between us, we're trying to identify the similarities of the tasting of what kind of fruit it would be or vegetable. And there's nothing I love more than that. I think it's
really enriching the experiences for everyone. And that's what I also like WSET in this regard that, yes, sure, level 2, you have to read multiple choice tests, and then it goes more into, here's the question, what is your process? What is your thought process to get to the answers? So it's not really about you need to get a right answer, but what is your thought process? And I think it's also very British education like that, like A levels, A2 levels, Cambridge. So it's a very, very specific, which is not the same in, for example, Germany, the way you have to, get the specific answer to get, tick box. So in this regard, I think it kind of opens up your mind for creativity and more about what is your train thought? How did you get to this answer?
Oh God, and I think that's so, so, so important because every single person is different in the world. And, if you put a test in front of someone and you say, what's the answer? They could get to the same conclusion, but go a completely different way. However, if you're saying A plus B equals C, and they go A to the power of J minus F, plus 9 minus D equals C, you've still got to the same answer, but just in your own unique way. And, let me give an example here. So when you apply for certain jobs, you used to have to do, and I think you still do, there was like a pre-analytic thing. You had to fill in a sheet, and based on your answers to this, you get put through to the next interview round. It's something assessment. It was a something assessment that you had to fill in. Now, I've never applied for a job in my life because I knew instantly that being as neurodivergent as I am, I had no hope in hell of ever getting through one of those. So historically, all I'd done throughout my life was email CEOs and MDs and general managers and say, I want to work for you for these reasons. And they'd either completely ignore the email, or there'd be a response CCing HR saying, don't know if we've got a job right now, but I like you and I want you to talk to my HR team. And that's how I got into the jobs that I had. I mean, I've been working for myself now for about 10 years and, well, actually no longer, 12 years. And I struggle to work in a corporate environment again, having now kind of done this.
Yeah.
But that was the way you think outside of the box. And so someone within a wine examination is able to translate how they got to, the end result in their own unique way, so long as they got there, as long as they're not just, pulling, bollocks out and pretending things, then I think that's great.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. What makes me think about it's also what other barriers for people who, for example, don't drink wine, but they simply, they don't, for spiritual or religious reasons. And I had someone, I was hosting a couple of months ago, a wine tasting session for 20 people. It was a group of friends, and 2 of them were Muslim, but they were super interested. So initially they were like, okay, I don't want to join because, I don't drink alcohol. And I convinced them, like, please come join. It's not really about drinking and getting drunk, because they never had this experience to even understand what wine tasting is. And we ended up just having this experience of understanding why, because they might have had, a fantastic palate, and I will be able to identify the best wines and the base tasting notes ever, but they could not have the experience. So there is a bit of a barrier there. But at the same time, when we made this event very inclusive from a perspective of, okay, you don't have to drink wine, there is, alternative for that. But the way you explain wine, the way you taste wine, it could really impress the drinking friends later in the future. Like, how do you know all this stuff about wine? You don't even drink. So that was really nice to make this event really inclusive from the experience perspective, or someone who's allergic, or someone, whenever you have a wine tasting event, you have crackers, so you have cheese. So it's not for everyone. We have meat. Yeah. So it's all those barriers for people to think about. But I really like thinking about how could we make it inclusive, or for expecting mothers. So all those kind of things. And I was always curious about sommeliers that are pregnant. Do they stop their career? How do they put it on pause? How does it work for them? Yeah.
I think in those instances, like religion aside, but for the other instances, you could still put in your mouth and then spit. Yeah. So long as, there's a certain threshold. If you do that with 100 different wines, then obviously it's going to be going to your system. But I think there's an element of that. And I think that, if people for whatever reason aren't able to embark on the drinking, they can always smell the wines to get the identifiers of it and kind of uncover.
That's what they did, yeah.
Yeah, which I really like. And, I think that even in particular religions or circumstances where some people don't drink because of the religion, other people are like, well, I'm still religious, but I will drink. We've got Fawaz. So Fawaz, for example, he's one of my Drinclusive mentees, and he's one of the only Muslim mixologists in the UK. And they have their faith. The family will have their faith, but he won't let him hold this back from his passion. And it's like, who also dictates these things? It's like, I could be a Christian. I'm gay. I could be a Christian, or I could be Catholic. Like, the Bible says that I'm going to hell, allegedly, but it also doesn't. It's like, who's to decipher and discern what these things mean and what they don't? Can Muslims drink alcohol? Can they not? Can I be gay? Will I go to hell? Like, all of these things. Yeah. And I think it's about unpacking it and just being a good person, enjoying your life and going with the flow, and just respecting that other people have different views. And just respect it. Get on with your life and respect it. You don't have to agree, but just respect that they do.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating, this person that you mentioned who's Muslim and who's in the wine industry, because I can only imagine the amount of stigma from both sides he'll have to encounter to eliminate all the barriers and actually be so strong and actually follow his passion. That's a huge respect for that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm taken away by the bravery of all the people who are on our program. And you got Miley, who, to my knowledge, is one of, if not the only, female transgender mixologist, also a huge passion in wine within the UK, and within a community of peoples right now who are receiving so much unwarranted hatred from a political standpoint, from people weaponizing an individual who's done nothing wrong, or a community, should I say, who've done absolutely nothing wrong. And the bravery that these individuals have, I think, is just to be applauded immensely. And I will do anything I can to support people from communities who are receiving so much like unfair hatred in the same way that, you know, the Tourette's community is looked at as a community of people who just swear all the time and can never get jobs and can never be successful. You know, 91% of people with Tourette's syndrome do not swear. Yeah. It's everything that's painted across the media. It's everything that's painted across social media, documentaries, newspapers. It's the worst case scenarios all the time. Comedies, movies. It's always the swearing people. And sometimes we need to give a shot and we need to help people on that trajectory and that journey in order to allow them to inspire others just like them, that they too are very capable. And that's what I tell every single person who's going through any form of hardship. You are capable. And do not let others who are telling you cannot do it be the reason you don't. If you have a physical disability where, you know, you genuinely cannot do something. So if you want to be a Premier League footballer, but you're in a wheelchair, okay, it doesn't mean that you can't play football. You find another way of doing it.
Yeah.
There's people who are in wheelchairs who will play ball games by being in their wheelchair, by using, I think there's some people who use their mouths to throw the balls to one another. Like there's different sports, there's different ways of doing things based on your passion. So just because you can't do this particular thing does not strike it out from ever happening. People who are artists who've lost use of their arms paint with their feet in order to have, or they paint with a paintbrush in their mouth.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Right?
Yeah.
There's beautiful ways of doing things and they exist.
Yeah, it's all about seeing the ways how you can get through that. For the past, you had such a fascinating experience in very, very different ways. Can you see how, in this particular way, wine industry has changed for the past, 10 years or so, 5 years? I'm obviously not an expert in that, but even myself, maybe because I already have a bit of bias because I'm more involved, I could see that it's becoming a lot more accessible and a lot more simplified. So if in the past you could see that if you're in the wine industry, it's a family, generational thing. But I think one of the first things I've seen that made me realize wine is very complex, but at the same not as complex as the Wine Folly book, because it makes it so easy, it makes it so playful. I think Melanie done a fantastic job. And then you see all these influencers popping out on Instagram everywhere, and everyone now is some sort of sommelier, and everyone is some sort of wine expert, everyone has a wine blog. Yeah, what is your view on that? And does it also potentially could bring problems from your perspective of reducing the quality of expertise, or it only enhances the diversity of people?
So I think that over the past kind of 10 years, the first progression started within the divide of genders, male to female. And there's been a lot of emphasis and work put go back. So if we look back at the last 10 years that we've had, I think the first kind of jumping point, the first moment of realization has been the gender divide between men and women. And I think that the vast majority of assistance and support so far has been to address that and to say, well, wine isn't just a man thing, it's a woman thing as well. And there's been a lot of female empowerment groups set up. We've been looking at people in seniority positions within organizations. The conversation has very much been had. It's now about actually addressing it and making the differences and putting the policies in place. So that's the first thing. And if you look at now, I mentioned earlier in the podcast, if you look at the divide between influencers when it comes to wine with men and women, I would argue there's probably just as many women now, if not potentially slightly more, because of the accessibility. And so I think that on that front, that's fantastic and that's amazing, because that's something that's needed to be addressed. You asked about dangers. I think that if we have one conversation, and one thing I'm finding time and time again is organizations saying that they are diverse because they've done an initiative to support women. And I think we have to be very clear that diversity is a multitude of different things. And diversity, in my mind, inclusivity and making sure people are included is definitely, you can bring gender into that. In terms of diversity, there is a 50% split of men and women on the planet. Do we need to get more women into jobs of seniority? Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to be careful about calling that diversity at the risk of then alienating people from LGBTQIA plus communities, people from underrepresented ethnicities, and people who have disabilities or neurodivergence. And the other thing that I'm finding right now, and it's been called out a lot more, and I think it's hopefully going to meet the headlines soon to really raise awareness to it, is I'm noticing a lot of people talking about female empowerment and putting on seminars and, introducing initiatives. But the people who they are helping within these seem to be the same middle-aged, white, straight, abled women.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about, there is diversity even within diversity. And if we're talking about, I'll use another example. If there was an initiative for LGBTQIA plus people, and it was only white, middle-aged, abled individuals, and no one from underrepresented ethnicities or people with neurodivergence or disabilities, it would be the same thing. And I think that it's all very well and good people talking about these words and wanting to make themselves look like they're a part of the conversation, but action is everything. And if I see a panel of the same people who are exactly the same and there's no shred of diversity to them, that needs to be called out, because that is not being DE&I forward. So that would be my only kind of comment on that front, is that progression is fantastic, but we need to educate people on what words mean, and a general understanding, at the risk of those other communities being alienated. And I just want to kind of summarize that, just in case anyone is unclear. I'm not saying by any means that women should not be supported and why. I'm saying the complete opposite. I'm saying that they absolutely should. I'm not sitting here saying there's no problem, women have fair opportunity. They don't. They do not. What I'm saying, what I'm being very clear about, is that a woman is not just one type of woman. A woman is a very different, eclectically, beautifully diverse mix of communities, of cultures, of disabilities, of sexual orientations. And that needs to be encompassed. And in the same way that, if wineries are looking at just one section, which is the female empowerment, they need to begin broadening out too, as I've mentioned, LGBTQIA plus, underrepresented ethnicities, disability, neurodivergence. And if they are aware of what that term means, they will begin to do that. I think the other thing we find is that DE&I has become such a buzzword. People love to talk about it. All these organizations love to talk.
Yeah.
But the second you go to them and say, can you support this project? Oh, I'm so sorry, we have no budget. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to actually take action. And you can talk as much as you want, and that's great, raise awareness, but actually be doing something to raise awareness, because there's got to be some substance to it as well. And if you talk about it, you look good and you create the false impression that you are doing something to create that change. But if you've not set aside any budgets, and I'm talking about even minuscule amounts here, in order to be able to actually create a meaningful, tangible change, then it becomes very blurry lines. So, and I'm even talking about making a donation of £300 to a charity or something in order to be able to showcase your commitment to the change. It doesn't need to be big money. And I think people often forget that, any form of actual tangible support is a great one.
I think one of my favorite phrases is diversity is fact. It's a fact, inclusion is a choice. And sometimes organizations just do the talk, employer branding, organizational branding, but forget to do the walk to walk. And it does require action. It does require a conscious behavior change. And it's not enough just to hire a couple of women in a senior position. That's tokenism. Yeah, and that's what organizations forget. And even though I do believe UK is a lot further ahead, a lot more advanced than the rest of the world when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there's still some things that need to be addressed depending on organization.
I think that's what I'm working on now, or trying to. And it's interesting because I've had conversations with mid-sized wine organizations who've said, but the problem is we don't have anyone who's diverse working for us. So if we put these things in place, then will anyone care about them? And my response to that was, diversity is beyond just what people look like. And they'll probably statistically, within an organization of 100 people, if they're saying that there's one gay person or one lesbian or whatever that they know of, well, statistically, there's another 10 people who've been so fearful to come out and be themselves in that organization because the culture is not accepting of them. Similarly, people are open about having disabilities and neurodivergence. If the organization is not aware of that, yes, it might be their choice to keep it to themselves, and that's fine. But if there's a culture in place where they feel that they are safe enough to be able to say, I'm gay and I'm proud, or I've got, autism, or I've got ADHD, or whatever it might be, then the company then has embraced that culture, and they can introduce all these different things that people will jump on to help because it's looked at as progressive. It's looked at as championing their employees, versus if no one in the organization of 100 people is gay, it's probably because they don't feel safe to say they are.
Yeah.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, that they might not be. It depends on the demographic of people, but we don't all have a big badge on us that says, I am a raging homosexual. Like, we don't wear that openly. I don't have something on me that says I've got ADHD. With the Tourette's is a bit more obvious because you can see me ticking, but some days I'll tick less, some days I'll tick more. And some people look at me and think that that I'm yawning, or that I'm coughing, or that I'm just being weird because they don't know what Tourette's is.
Yeah.
But if you have the culture in place, which is welcoming and opening and embracing based on what you're doing and what you're proving to the outside world that you're doing, working with charities, investing into mentorships, bringing in an internship program, whatever it might be to showcase that, that's when people feel a lot more comfortable.
And it's not really about a good thing to do and it's a nice thing to do, but it's also, if your organization does not represent population, that you're just simply not going to understand your market, right? So you're just looking at statistics, 15% of population has a disability, some sort of a disability, and most of it is not visible. Or just looking at statistics and what we have in the world. And if your organization just say, oh no, we are all, default, and the default is usually white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender, then there's definitely not psychological safety for people to be there.
Absolutely. And, you look to, we talk about, oh, yes, it's a nice thing to do, blah, 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 blah. But in actuality, like if you look at the economy, if you look at the pure and simple facts, the people who are buying the most wine historically are beginning to die, because they're at an age group where they are old and they're beginning to pass away, which is leading to a shrinking of wine consumption and wine purchase. If you think the fact that, and I gave statistics earlier for the Black and Asian community, I don't have statistics for other ethnic minority communities, but if I did, I would have brought them. And so you've got the statistics of growth between the Asian and Black community in the UK. You've got the not statistics, but we are aware that the LGBTQIA plus world is going to grow exponentially as people do not feel fearful of hiding who they are. You've got the neurodivergent and disability world where for the first time in history, people are beginning to own who they are, what they live with, and embrace it and be a powerhouse because of it. Take those three things and add them into the economy and the demographics of wine drinkers. If those three communities do not feel represented, they will find other passions and other interests that do not involve alcohol. That means that the wine industry is screwed because no one will be buying the wine. All the wineries that currently, for some people, it would be a great thing. All those, £200 wines, Well, one, they probably go out of business because they can't reduce their costs. They'd have to increase them even more. So actually, it's not a good thing. Everyone would have to pay more.
Yeah. And the margins are already so low. So, yeah.
So, I mean, it's pure and simple, really. But if people don't buy into it because they don't care, then it won't change. But it's also not a shame on you for not supporting share. How dare you? You can't say that we're on a journey. And I would always say, like, there's some people from underrepresented communities who get very offended when someone asks them an honest and open question. And the people from those communities need to take a step back and appreciate that individuals are trying to learn. And they may ask a question in a way that they're just not aware of how to ask the question. And it's okay for them to do that because they're on this learning journey. If they're trying to change their mindset, if they're trying to adapt and evolve and help those communities by asking these questions to understand, give them a safe space to allow them to do that. Because otherwise, it's going to create a culture of fear. That's going to make these people move away even more.
Shame, silence, cancel culture, everything. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, we all have things to learn. And change is not just from one community of people. It comes from everyone, even those from the underrepresented communities, allowing and being patient for that change to be translated. It's not something that happens overnight, but it's something that in the right way can be sped up.
And it's not a destination, it's a journey. We're all learning. I've been working in this industry for how many years? I've been called out all the time. And yes, I do get confused with some terms because they keep coming up or keep changing, keep evolving. But our language changes and evolves. Nothing is static. Culture changes and evolves. And those people who say, oh my God, I can't keep up with all the DI stuff. It's just a passing trend. No, it's not. Yeah, it's just it's always been here. It's just something that is more accepted now. So it's not going to go away. And I think regardless of whether people like it or not like it, everyone has their own opinions. But if you're a business, you also need to understand it. Maybe not from the emotional perspective, because you can't relate, but from a logical perspective and a rational perspective. If you don't adapt, you're going to have consequences in the same way that if you didn't, 20 years ago, buy yourself a computer and wanted to learn how to use internet, you're going to miss out. So as simple as that, you're going to have consequences.
Yeah. If you didn't update your corks, in the past to allow for less, cork taint oxidation, whatever it might be, then you're suffering the consequences. So you're right. You're spot on with that. And I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. It's get involved now rather than later when you have to, or as well, because again, going back to the whole value statement, it's one thing to showcase support at the beginning. It's another thing to hop on the bandwagon because you had to. People notice.
People notice.
Feel right through it.
Yeah, and it's a lot more expensive to kind of fix it when something goes wrong. And it's your reputation at stake. It's like you trying to last minute to change your recruitment process or change your production process or whatever. It's not, and then it's too late.
Definitely agree.
Wonderful.
And you know what? Yeah. I would say to anyone who is listening here, regardless of, what community they're from or what background they're from, for those who want more information on the Drinklusive mentorship that I discussed, go to the3drinkers.com, send us an email. The next cohort we're hoping to bring on board around September time. So if you are from an underrepresented community and you want to dip your toe into wines and spirits, then you should apply for it. If you're someone who's very passionate about creating change in this world and you think that you could be a great mentor, get in touch because we are looking for more mentors for the next cohort. And, if we work together and we just embrace it and we love each day as it comes, we can make incredible things happen. There's a whole lot of love built around this. Is it the easiest thing in the world? No. Is it incredibly rewarding? Yes. Is change the easiest thing? No. But is it something that we're passionate about and that we should strive towards? 100%.
Wonderful. That was exactly the question I wanted to ask you for our listeners, how to get in touch with us. So it's perfect ending. And you've done it all yourself. Thank you so much for being here today. Wonderful conversation. I've learned so much and I'm sure our audience learned a lot. And we definitely just scratched the surface. At the same time, we covered quite a broad range of topics. So it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you ever so much. And I should also say, because I've not given my own personal Instagram handle, have I? It's SYPPED. Should anyone have any personal questions as well?
Wonderful. Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback, recommendations, or would like to be a speaker in our next episode, reach out via hi@beamreach-inclusion.com. Also, if you need our expertise with diversity inclusion training, would like us to conduct a comprehensive audit, or need a helping hand with DI strategy, don't be shy and get in touch. Stay tuned, and until the next episode.